Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Bob Corker opts out of the Senate. What's next for the Confederate statues, the Fairgrounds, and more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Toby Sells, news editor at the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And so, Bill, as I said at the top, Bob Corker, senator from Tennessee, has decided not to run again. Lots of consternation and surprise on the national level. I think we had a sense. I was not that surprised that he chose not to. And he was on the show, a couple months ago. And it's not that he explicitly said, you could just tell some hesitancy, and other people have said this, that he was not, 100% certain he wanted to do this again.
Well, and the longer that he put off making an announcement about what he was going to do, the more this possibility started to become real and solidify. So yeah, Bob Corker is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, one of the most important committee chairmanships in the United States Senate. And so this is big news nationally. He had been on the short list for Secretary of State. So you've got that reaction. Meanwhile, at the state level, even if Bob Corker completely walks away from life as an elected official, he has disrupted really two races. The first is the race for his Senate seat. The second is the race for governor, the other statewide position where you mount a statewide campaign.
Which is also in 2018, yeah, which is the same cycle, the exact same time.
Same election cycle, and in some ways, not always, the same consideration. So some of the people, particularly the Republicans, who are in that race for governor, are at least going to take a look at running for Senate. Is there a path to elected office there that is perhaps easier for a particular candidate than running for governor?
And did Bob Corker say whether he was going to run for governor? Did he rule it out completely? Was he coy?
He did what politicians do so well. He said nothing about that, which means to people like me, that means he didn't rule it out. And that's what it means to politicos as well. So, there is that whole thing. Is Corker going to run for governor? That was a scenario that had been talked about pretty early on, that Corker might not run for re-election, but he might run for governor. And Haslam, who is term limited, Bill Haslam, the governor of this state of yours and mine, might decide to run for the United States Senate.
And he did not rule it out when asked.
He's not
been
ruled
asked
it
before
out,
and hasn't ruled it out.
And Corker has said that Haslam is one of 3 or 4 people that he thinks are serious contenders for this.
Yeah. Toby, you want to speculate here? You want to play the name game of how this muddies everything up?
It's a political parlor game when something like this is afoot. Here's the thing, and like you said, it shuffles everybody around. And all names are on the table, I think, for all these races for governor or for the Senate seat now. One interesting one that I'll put out there that may seem a little silly, but there was some speculation months ago that maybe Peyton Manning had some political willingness out there. And then just yesterday, I got a news release that he and the Haslams, Bill Haslam and his wife, they'd worked together on a Pat Head Summit fundraiser. So he's kind of getting his name out there, associating his name with some folks out there. I read it, the tea leaves, and that's all that is, but it's pretty interesting speculation. Yeah.
The other part of it is, so if you do go through here, and I've talked to some people, since this came out, you've got, if Haslam runs for the Senate, that's one very distinct possibility. You've got Marsha Blackburn with the current Republican representative from District 9. Am I right about that? District 8.
District 7.
7, thank you. I knew that. You've got Diane Black. So you've got those people. Then you've got the people, as you said, Bill, the people who are already declared for governor. Randy Boyd, clearly, if Corker runs, that's probably a problem for Randy Boyd because Randy Boyd is running as this, hey, it's be Haslam 2.0, continuation, former economic development commissioner. He's put a lot of work in around the state, but his message is going to overlap pretty distinctly with Bob Corker's, right? Then you've got Diane Black. Is she interested in running Nashville? As I said, what she represents Nashville area, is a Republican. But who else with the governors? How else does that scramble things, do you think?
Well, you could also have Bill Lee, I think, who's a wealthy businessman from Franklin, Tennessee, who has been coming along. Who knows what happens with his campaign? Does it help it, or does it hurt it? I mean, Corker in the governor's race would be the effect of someone doing a big cannonball into a pretty small swimming pool.
Right, yeah. And in terms of financing, in terms of awareness, campaign apparatus, and all that stuff. We are exclusively talking about Republicans. There is another party, and that is the Democrats, Toby. Does this, any sense, again, just speculating the parlor game of this, any switch, any change, any more likelihood in such a dominantly red state that this opens the door on either for a Democratic governor or a Democratic senator?
I don't think so. Not right now. Not in these days. Of course, Carl Dean is still out there. Former Nashville mayor's going out there,
running for governor.
And
Craig Fitzhugh, the minority leader in the House from the Jackson, Tennessee area.
Right. And I don't see how the waves would ever spill over there. Like Bill said, I mean, it's just going to be a big cannonball on the Republican side, and that's probably the way it's going to go. In these elections, of course, I can't tell the future, but I don't see how it disrupts the Democratic race at all. But maybe you have other thoughts on it.
No, I mean, Carl Dean has a plan that is pretty set on running for governor, and I don't think he's going to uproot a lot of hard work because of something that's happening on the other side of the aisle. By the same token, Andy Burke, who's the mayor of Chattanooga, who had been talked about as a candidate for governor, is now looking at the Senate race on the Democratic side. So what you might see is this crop of relatively new mayors across the state who are Democrats, who are trying to make up their mind. And I think a lot of those guys had already ruled out the race for governor, and now are looking at the Senate race. We should also mention, back on the Republican side, former Congressman Stephen Fincher, who opted not to run for re-election this last time in 2016. He had said when he made the announcement that if one of the Senate seats came open for Tennessee, that he was interested in that. Fincher is looking really hard at the Senate race.
And the other one that should be mentioned that was talked about was Mark Green. So Mark Green, a state senator, former military, almost got which I can't remember which job, but almost got a job in the Trump administration.
He was nominated by Trump for Secretary of the Army.
Thank you.
The comments he had made as a legislator on a number of issues really made him a lightning rod. So he dropped out of that. But Green had been running for governor pretty early on the Republican side. So when he dropped out, the immediate thought was, well, he's going to get back in the race for governor. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And May Beavers. I mean, she's a very far right Republican in the state. A lot of red meat issues that she does. Maybe this opens up an easier path, like you said, for her to run for Senate instead, saying the time is right for these kind of issues for Tennesseans, and maybe it'd be easy for me to get there.
The other thing will be just interesting, and then we'll move on to local issues, but is the national low approval ratings for Trump. Obviously, he's going to be have higher ratings in Tennessee. I haven't seen recent polls on that, but it'll be interesting if this thing becomes a bit of a referendum on Trump. Corker has spoken out, being disappointed in Trump, and you've got these kind of mainstream candidates in the kind of centrist wing of the Republican Party, and then, like you said, May Beavers and maybe Diane Black and Mark Green certainly. Do they push more under the banner of Trump, the Tennessee Republicans, in that direction? Let's move on, though, again, locally to a couple of things that happened this week. Edmund Ford, current city councilman, part of the Ford family, political dynasty family, et cetera. He is declared for county commission. Is that correct?
Yes. He's going to run for the Shelby. This is follow the.
Yeah, we need a grid here. We need a chart.
We
need some graphics.
Edmund Ford of the Memphis City Council is running for the county commission seat that his cousin, Justin Ford, cannot run for re-election to because he is term limited. Yeah. So is Edmund Ford, who is actually in his third term on the council, but the term limits kicked in after he had been elected to his first term. So he's also term limited in 2019. So he's kicked off his campaign, and there are all kinds of dynamics. First, there's a Ford family dynamic. If Edmund Ford wins the county commission seat and resigns from the council seat, will Justin Ford then
run for the
run for the appointment to the council seat and then run for election to the council seat in 2019? That council seat has been held. The city council seat has been held by a member of the Ford family since 1971 when John Ford was elected to it. The county commission seat that Justin Ford has been held by a member of the Ford family since 1994, with the brief exception of Edith Moore holding the seat when Joe Ford became interim county mayor.
You would definitely win Shelby County Commissioner bingo. Like any kind of trivia bingo, any game on that, like that, Edith Moore would be the winner.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on this? Also, we taped this this week Thursday morning, but David Lenore is expected to announce a much talked about run for county mayor. Terry Rowland, county commissioner, has already declared what, a year ago.
Right.
Any thoughts on this stuff?
Everything I know, I read from Jackson Baker's column in the Memphis Flyer. He's our political dean over there, and he had some interesting stuff in this week's paper about some of the fundraisers that these folks were having, especially one by Terry Rowland up in Millington, where he kind of painted his two opponents there. He painted David Lenore as Mr. Drysdale, which from the Beverly Hillbillies. I don't know if you get that. He's the rich banker, this guy with a lot of money. And then on the other side was Joy Tulliadis, who he basically painted as Jim Strickland 2.0, and so he's trying to get his wedge in there. That's how he's painting himself. We got to upheaval this thing and get new blood at the top. So that's kind of where he is. I thought it was an interesting.
Yeah, and we should say on the Democratic side, the only declared candidate is Sidney Chisholm. Is that correct?
Sidney Chisholm so far. That
former
is,
county commissioner.
Former county commissioner. That is going to change.
Yeah, that others will get in. And again, we'll move on to some other things, but it is interesting. Lenore has been talked about as a future Shelby County mayor for a long time, and from the trustee's office and moving there, and everyone thought it was sort of a cakewalk of him being an establishment guy, the hooks, the centrist, the kind of person people would want in that role among Republicans, and then Trump won. And Terry Rowland suddenly became, for a lot of people who've said to me off the record, suddenly Terry seemed a lot more viable in a way that they didn't think he was in terms of running against David Lenore. So that's an interesting thing right now. Let's switch over to the Fairgrounds. I mentioned at the top of the show. We are moving closer, it seems, to some sort of final plan, right? There's a TDZ, Tourism Development Zone, incentives from the state, the application or the extension. They've got to get a plan in there soon to the state.
By the end of the year.
By the end of the year. You want to go through, Bill? I mean, some of the things talked about, and then we'll let you talk about the Coliseum. But for the Fairgrounds, separate from the Coliseum, what's being talked about now?
The latest iteration, keeping in mind that we'll have what is pretty much the final plan in November on this. What we are talking about now at this stage is that the Coliseum remains. The Coliseum remains a 4,999 seat venue of some sort, so as not to invoke the Grizzlies' no-compete clause, which came to life rather suddenly earlier this month when Graceland announced plans for a 6,000-seat venue. Also, you would have a hotel on the Central Avenue frontage, probably next to the Children's Museum of Memphis, at least in the city's tentative site plan. Always emphasize tentative. Then you would have the Fairview High School building, which is now home to the Maxine Smith STEAM Academy, would lose its gymnasium on the back and would get a new gymnasium, a bigger gymnasium in back of the Kroc Center, which opens up the Central Avenue frontage for some kind of retail development. And the high school football field, surrounded by the outdoor track oval, would move from its Central Avenue frontage over to where Liberty Land used to be in the southwest corner of the property.
And still the premise is, in terms of paying for some of this, is youth sports. So more fields, more sports. Is that correct? That indoor volleyball, outdoor baseball fields, a lot of these kind of what I jokingly would call professional sports for kids, where they are traveling baseball, traveling teams. That's still a big part of this?
Yeah, but it's nowhere near as much of the site as it was during the Wharton administration plans on this.
Yeah. Thoughts on all this?
Well, the amateur youth sports, that's certainly the focus of the coalition, the Coliseum Coalition, who's been working. They just released a business plan a week or two ago that kind of spells out how they would go about reopening and making viable the Coliseum over there. They would have the venue inside, and they would open that up to graduation, certainly, concerts, all the other things, but their main focus would be youth and amateur sports. So you'd have volleyball tournaments, basketball tournaments, those kind of things in there. And that was really one of the the biggest things that was going to keep that place open, the revenue from that. So I know they have a focus on that because that's what makes money. They've told me, there's no nostalgia in their plan. They say this is the thing that's going to make this thing viable. So at least for them, youth sports is certainly a focus, but yeah, certainly not on the level of Wharton's plan.
And you wrote, Bill, there's some concern. So Fred Jones from the Southern Heritage Classic was on the show in the last month or so, talking about the fairgrounds, talking about other things. There's some concern that he's expressed about them reducing the number potentially reducing the number of parking spaces as they, open up parts of the Liberty Land that now is green, gets used, becomes fields, et cetera. There's talk of a parking garage to compensate for those lost open spaces, green spaces, right? But he's a little wary that he wants to see it hard and fast that there is enough parking for the Southern Heritage Classic and for Tigers football.
He is wary, and the other two football tenants at the Liberty Bowl, the University of Memphis and the AutoZone Liberty Bowl game, are very wary of what they've seen, even though it is tentative, because the first thing they noticed was that they lose 3,000 parking spaces, many of those on the grass in the Liberty Land area. And the parking garage, while it is talked about, it is not on the site plan, and the location of it is kind of nebulous, at least at this point. There's some talk about it would be on the north end, maybe on the Central Avenue frontage, maybe not. But they want something more definite, and the first thing they noticed was 3,000 parking spaces not there.
Right. Thoughts?
Just back on the TDZ, all that would be paid for by the Tourist Development Zone money, which would kind of capture local sales tax and put it back onto debt payments. City officials are also working to refine the TDZ for downtown. That's going to help pay for the Bicentennial Gateway project. I think I said that right.
Yeah.
It would expand
Convention center potentially.
All that.
Pinch district and so on.
And I think they're going to have a plan to the State Building Commission in November. And see if they can get that expansion approved, which of course would could help the riverfront, St. Jude plans, all those things. So we've got a couple of different TDZs that we're working to the state right now.
Right. Okay. And gets back to the convention center. You may have just said that, but this hotel motel tax and the work that's beginning that they've approved to begin to renovate to some degree the convention center, short of a $1 billion. We've had Ken Kane from the Convention Visitors Bureau on. There is no plan for some $500 to $1 billion Music City massive convention center, but certainly he makes the case, and others make the case, of expanding what they have and improving the kind of outdated facilities there, and that also is part of this.
Probably about a $60 million renovation of the convention center.
Which gets into some news about hotels just real quickly that, it is, Kevin Kane, again, from the Convention Visitors Bureau, has worried that this incentive money that has gone to small hotels would take away from the potential for a convention center hotel. So a lot of talk now about whether one will get built. The 100 North Main building, which was an office building, does that get converted into convention centers? And then 2 hotels got announced this last week. Building permits pulled for one right downtown in a kind of blighted area right next to our office, it happens to be. And then also the one that's been empty, what was it called before? It was that's right across from the Redbird Stadium that sat. They started demolition and gutting, and then it sat there for about 2-3 years.
It was called the Benchmark Hotel in the 1980s. There's been some other brands after that, but but the thing is that a lot of the hotel proposals that surfaced kind of didn't start moving toward definitely happening until after basically the Downtown Memphis Commission had said, we're not going to use the hotel incentives for those. There may be some out there that have them, but I think they reacted to the floodgates opening on the hotels and motels pretty quickly.
Yeah. We've got about 6 minutes left here to the status of the statues. Bill, where are we in terms of the city and the forest statue it's in the medical district and their application to the state to take the statue down?
Well, the city of Memphis, the Strickland administration goes before the Historical Commission next month, October 13th, I believe.
That's right.
Which is meeting in Athens, Tennessee. They move their meeting sites around. And the city is going to seek a waiver from the state law that allows it to take down the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest. That's all the application is for. And in talking with Bruce McMullen, who is the city's chief legal officer, city attorney, this is pretty complex. It involves what if any, rules the Historical Commission will adopt on that day that are not yet in place. Do they adopt those on a long-term basis? And then if they do they adopt them on an emergency basis? Because if they don't adopt them on an emergency basis, they can't vote on the matter when it comes up that particular day. And the city very much wants a vote on it that day.
And, so let's say for a second, and I think Alan Wade, the counsel to the city council, the lawyer to the city council, and others have said there's just a very low chance that the Historic Commission is going to vote to give Memphis permission to do this.
That's
and
right.
So now we're in the world of speculation and rumor. What happens next? I mean,
Alan Wade said we're going to call out the dogs. Did he say that? I think he said that in a council meeting, and I don't know exactly what that means, but they're going to get tough and find Plan B and a Plan C until they can make a movement on this. But what that means, I would not even speculate because I really don't know.
Yeah.
But I think Plan B is going to be the council's ordinance, which they vote on next week on third and final reading, that says these are the grounds that we are going to use to remove the statue that have nothing to do with the Historical Commission or requiring their permission. And if the Historical Commission doesn't grant approval for this on the 13th, then we're going to act on the ordinance, and the ordinance calls for the removal of not only the Forrest statue, but the Jefferson Davis statue as well in another downtown park. And for the administration, if they're denied, they'll go to Chancery Court in Davidson County and seek a court injunction.
And I've said this before, but people have pointed out there is some weird, and we've talked about it on the show, some way in which the parks can give them away. I still don't understand that mechanism where the statues can be given away. I've heard that talked about in some legal maneuver. And again, the council is clearly 13-0, wants these things gone. And I'm also struck by, and then people are very concerned what happens when the legislature goes back in session and what rules could get changed to limit options even more with a very conservative legislature. But I haven't heard or seen, and maybe it's just me and people can tweet me or whatever, but people stepping up and saying, no. People in Memphis saying, no, those statues need to stay.
They're there.
I haven't. It's just be the circles I'm in, apparently.
Well.
I mean, what are they saying? Because we need to give a fair shake to them, and I don't mean to not.
They don't think that the statue should be removed because the statues have been there. They equate it with rewriting history. This is a very old discussion over.
But any politicians that have come forward, anybody in power who's come forward and said that?
No.
Right.
No.
I think that's maybe what I mean.
Among the political elected leaders who have a vote on this process, the only difference of opinion is how this happens, not that it does happen.
I think that's what I was after. That it's been interesting compared to some other cities. You want to talk a little bit about some things going on at the legislature out of session, but they still do work and planning and some things you've reported on, Toby.
Sure. The legislators have been busy up there in Nashville. Usually when they put out and issued a summer study, that just means, hey, we don't want to talk about this anymore, and it goes away. But they took up a couple of issues this summer that were really interesting. The first one is there was a House committee that just issued its final recommendations to the governor as far as what we do about the opioid crisis in the state. And there were some interesting things there. They want 25 more FBI or TBI agents, Tennessee Bureau of Investigations agents, to help fight this. They want some emergency medicines distributed across the state to help people if they're in an overdose. And they want more access to care and screenings and those kind of things. The thing that really struck me when I looked into it, I had heard that a legislator say that there were around 2,000 opioid-related deaths, overdose deaths last year. And when I looked at the map from the Tennessee Department of Health, most of the deaths and most of the folks that are taking these, it's an East Tennessee thing. It's very little of it was in West Tennessee.
That's interesting.
There were all but 4 counties in West Tennessee last year where people were taking more than a high dose of opioids. There were like less than, and so in some counties it was less than 2.5% of the population, but then in some East Tennessee counties it was 12.5% of the population out there were taking a lot of opioids. So I thought that was interesting to kind of see where this thing is happening out there. So they've got some recommendations. We'll see what they do when they come back in. There was another group, another committee, a joint committee, joint House and Senate committee, that were looking at the state's medical cannabis program, and they brought in experts, they brought in health officials, law enforcement, and they basically said, we hear the issues, we know the issues, marijuana's coming, so get ready.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have. We leave it on that note. Join us again next week. Thanks. Wanting to do this again.
Well, and the longer that he put off making an announcement about what he was going to do, the more this possibility started to become real and solidify. So yeah, Bob Corker is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, one of the most important committee chairmanships in the United States Senate. And so this is big news nationally. He had been on the short list for Secretary of State. So you've got that reaction. Meanwhile, at the state level, even if Bob Corker completely walks away from life as an elected official, he has disrupted really 2 races. The first is the race for his Senate seat. The second is the race for governor, the other statewide position where you mount a statewide campaign.
Which is also in 2018, yeah, which is the same cycle, the exact same time.
Same election cycle, and in some ways, not always, the same consideration. So some of the people, particularly the Republicans, who are in that race for governor, are at least going to take a look at running.
I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Toby Sells, news editor at the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
And Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And so, Bill, as I said at the top, Bob Corker, senator from Tennessee, has decided not to run again. Lots of consternation and surprise on the national level. I think we had a sense. I was not that surprised that he chose not to. And he was on the show, a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. And it's not that he explicitly said, you could just tell some hesitancy. And other people have said this, that he was not 100% certain.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Bob Corker opts out of the Senate. What's next for the Confederate statues, the Fairgrounds, and more tonight on Behind the Headlines.
For Senate. Is there a path to elected office there that is perhaps easier for a particular candidate than running for governor?
And did Bob Corker say whether he was going to run for governor? Did he rule it out completely? Was he coy?
He did what politicians do so well. He said nothing about that, which means to people like me, that means he didn't rule it out.
Right.
And that's what it means to politicos
Yeah.
as well. So, there is that whole thing. Is Corker going to run for governor?